I was halfway through thanking our guests when my mother stood up in the middle of the reception wearing black head to toe, like she had come to a funeral instead of her daughter's wedding. Before anyone could react, she walked straight to the microphone, pulled it from the stand, and said, her voice perfectly steady, "Tonight we are mourning the daughter we lost." 150 people went silent. My sister Madison stepped beside her and slid a paper toward me, a statement confirming the $92,000 I'd spent on my parents' house was a gift. My hand was already reaching for the pen, until Daniel leaned closer and whispered something that made me stop cold. "Before I continue, tell me where you're listening from. People like to think family dynamics are complicated, but in my house, growing up, they were actually very simple. My older sister Madison was the star, and I was the system that kept everything running quietly in the background. We grew up in a quiet town called Cedar Ridge, the kind of place where everyone knew who your parents were and which kid in the family was supposed to become something impressive. In our house, that kid was always Madison. She had the kind of personality people noticed immediately: bright smile, perfect hair, trophies from debate club, and cheerleading stacked neatly on shelves in the living room. My mother loved introducing her to guests like she was unveiling a prize-winning sculpture. I learned early that Madison didn't just get attention, she got belief. Whatever she wanted to do, everyone assumed she would succeed. I was different, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, practical way that doesn't attract applause. I did well in school, but I never made a scene about it. I fixed problems. If something broke, I figured out how to repair it. If bills were confusing, I organized them. My parents didn't exactly ignore me, but they treated me like a resource rather than a child. I remember once standing in the kitchen after bringing home a perfect report card, waiting for some kind of reaction. My mother glanced at it, smiled briefly, then asked if I could help Madison finish a scholarship application. That moment wasn't unusual. It was the pattern. Our refrigerator door said everything about our family without anyone needing to explain it. The entire surface was covered with Madison's photos, awards, and announcements. Debate champion, homecoming court, volunteer recognition. If one of my report cards made it onto the fridge at all, it usually lasted about 2 days before being replaced by something Madison had accomplished. The phrase I heard most growing up wasn't praise, it was expectation. My parents would say it casually, like it was obvious. Madison shines. Claire handles things. At the time, I even took pride in that role. Being the dependable one meant I was trusted. It meant I was capable. What I didn't understand yet was that being capable in our family didn't mean being valued. It meant being useful. The only person who ever seemed to notice the difference was my grandfather, Thomas. He lived quietly on the edge of town and rarely interfered in family discussions. But he watched everything. When I was about 16, I helped him repair the fence behind his house after a storm knocked it down. We worked all afternoon without saying much. As the sun started dropping behind the trees, he leaned on the wooden post we'd just secured and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Claire," he said slowly, "being useful is not the same as being appreciated." At the time I laughed it off, assuming he was just being philosophical, the way older people sometimes are. I didn't realize he was warning me. Looking back now, the signs were always there. Madison was encouraged to dream, while I was encouraged to solve problems. Madison made plans for the future. I handled whatever mess happened in the present, and every time our family needed something difficult, expensive, or complicated, the same unspoken rule quietly came into play. Madison shines. Claire handles things. The call from my parents came on a Tuesday evening, just after I finished reviewing a set of project budgets for work. My mother's voice sounded unusually soft, the kind of softness that usually meant something serious had already gone wrong. She asked if I could come by the house that weekend. "There are a few things we need to talk about," she said, carefully avoiding any details. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. My parents were not people who admitted problems easily. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday, the situation was worse than I expected. The house looked tired in a way it never had before. The roof sagged slightly along one side where rain had clearly been leaking through for months. The front steps had begun to tilt, and the siding near the kitchen window had warped from water damage. Inside, the problems multiplied. The plumbing rattled loudly when the sink ran. A hairline crack ran along part of the foundation wall in the basement. It wasn't just cosmetic damage. The house was slowly falling apart. My father spread a stack of repair estimates across the dining table like a losing hand in a poker game. Roofing, plumbing, structural reinforcement, electrical rewiring. Every contractor's quote circled roughly the same number, $91,000, give or take a few hundred. They didn't have the savings to handle it. And insurance wouldn't cover most of the issues because the damage had developed gradually over years. My parents spoke carefully, almost apologetically, but I could hear the expectation beneath the words. I had the stable job. I had savings. And in our family, when something complicated appeared, the same quiet rule always applied. I told them I would take care of it. Over the next 3 months, I poured nearly every dollar I had saved over 9 years into that house. I coordinated contractors, negotiated costs, and scheduled inspections. I tracked every invoice and every transfer like it was a full-time job on top of my actual one. The roof was replaced first, then the plumbing lines were rebuilt, and the foundation cracks were reinforced. Slowly, the house began to look solid again, stronger than it had in years. When the last contractor packed up his tools, my parents walked through the rooms with visible relief. My mother ran her hand along the freshly painted kitchen wall and smiled. Then she turned to me and said something that, at the time, felt like the first real acknowledgement I had ever received from her. This house will always be yours. The words hung in the air long enough for me to believe them. I didn't ask for documents. I didn't ask for legal paperwork. I had grown up believing family promises meant something, so I trusted her. About 6 months after the renovation was finished, I stopped by my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't planned anything formal. I was just in the area and thought I'd drop in. Maybe grab coffee with my mom the way we sometimes did. The driveway looked the same. The porch looked stronger after the repairs. And for a moment, it felt good seeing the place standing solid again. But the strange feeling started the moment I walked inside. The hallway looked different, not dramatically different, just rearranged. A few picture frames had been moved. The rug I remembered from childhood was gone. Then I walked past the door to what had once been my bedroom and stopped. The door was open. Inside, the room had been completely redecorated. New bedding, soft lighting, a vanity table placed against the window. On the wall where my old desk used to be, hung a framed photo of Madison and her friends from some rooftop party I didn't recognize. It wasn't my room anymore. It hadn't been mine for a while. Madison leaned against the doorway behind me, like none of it was unusual. She crossed her arms and gave a small shrug. "You moved on," she said casually. I figured someone should use the space. The way she said it, light, almost amused, made something uncomfortable shift in my chest. I turned and walked downstairs where my mother was setting plates on the kitchen counter. I asked her directly, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's going on with the house?" She didn't even pause. "You helped your parents," she said simply. "That's what daughters do." The sentence landed like a door quietly closing. No hesitation. No reminder of what she had promised me after the renovation. Just a clean rewrite of the story. Within a few weeks, the rumors started circulating in small ways that only became obvious when I stepped back and looked at the pattern. Madison told relatives that Daniel had been pushing ideas about the house. An aunt casually asked me at a family dinner if I planned to sell the property once I got control of it. Even a neighbor mentioned hearing that my fiancé had convinced me the house should belong to us someday. Each comment carried the same subtle message. I wasn't being reasonable. I was being influenced. One evening, I repeated one of those rumors to Daniel, half confused and half frustrated. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful but serious. When I finished explaining what people had been saying, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. "They're rewriting the story," he said. And the moment he said it, I realized he was right. The moment I truly understood what my family was planning didn't come from a dramatic confrontation. It happened quietly, almost by accident. The way the most important truths sometimes do. I had stopped by my parents' house one evening to drop off a package that had been mistakenly delivered to my apartment. The house was quiet when I walked in, and I assumed everyone was upstairs. As I set the box on the kitchen counter, I heard Madison's voice drifting down the hallway from the living room. She was on the phone. Normally, I would have made some noise to let her know I was there, but something about the tone of her voice made me pause. It wasn't casual conversation. It was deliberate, almost excited. "No, it'll work." She was saying, "The house is already in their names. She paid for the repairs, but that doesn't change ownership. Once she signs the document, confirming it was a gift, it's over." There was a short pause while the person on the other end spoke. Madison laughed softly. "Yeah, we're doing it at the wedding. There'll be plenty of people around. She won't want to make a scene in front of everyone." My stomach dropped before she even finished the sentence. "And once it's settled," Madison continued, lowering her voice slightly, "we can list the place. Houses in this area are selling for around $470 right now. $470,000. I stood there in the hallway, completely still, listening to my sister casually outline a plan that involved turning nearly a decade of my savings into a profit opportunity for her. The most unsettling part wasn't the money. It was how normal she sounded. Like this had all been carefully arranged, long before I had any idea. When she hung up, I slipped back outside without saying a word. Later that night, I told Daniel everything I had heard. He didn't interrupt once while I explained the conversation. And when I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, thinking through the pieces. Then he stood up, walked over to his desk, and opened his laptop. "If that's their plan," he said calmly, "then we need documentation." Over the next week, our living room slowly turned into something that looked less like a home and more like an investigation board. Daniel helped me collect every record connected to the renovation. Bank transfers showing the $92,000 leaving my accounts. Contractor invoices with my name listed as the client. Payment confirmations. Inspection reports. And email threads scheduling each stage of the work. Some of the contractors even still had before and after photos of the house saved in their project files. By the time we finished organizing everything, the timeline told a story so clear it almost felt unreal that my family thought they could erase it. That was when Daniel suggested we meet with a lawyer. A week later, we sat across from Jonathan Reed, a calm, methodical attorney who listened carefully as we explained the entire situation. He reviewed the documents for nearly 20 minutes without saying much, occasionally nodding as he read. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at me. "You have a very strong unjust enrichment case," he said. "If they benefited from your investment and now deny the agreement, the law doesn't simply ignore that." When we left his office, Daniel placed a small USB drive on the kitchen table that evening. Every bank record, every invoice, every message we could recover, all of it, he said quietly, "fits right here." And for the first time since hearing Madison's plan, I didn't feel powerless anymore. By the time the reception began that evening, the ballroom was glowing with soft lights, quiet music, and the low hum of conversation from nearly 150 guests. From the outside, it looked exactly like the kind of wedding people imagine when they think about perfect beginnings. Flowers arranged along the tables, glasses raised in celebration, friends and relatives laughing under warm chandeliers. Daniel stood beside me, calm and steady as always, while we thanked people for coming. If anyone watching closely sensed the tension beneath the surface, they didn't show it. My parents arrived late. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the way they were dressed. Black, not formal evening wear, but unmistakably somber, dark enough that several guests turned their heads when they entered the room. My mother walked straight toward the stage where the microphone stood beside the band equipment, her posture stiff with determination. I felt Daniel's hand tighten slightly around mine. Before anyone could stop her, she reached the microphone stand, pulled the mic free, and tapped it once. The soft feedback sound cut through the music, and conversations around the room faded into uneasy silence. "My husband and I would like to say something," she announced. 150 people turned toward her. My mother took a slow breath and looked directly at me. Her voice carried clearly through the speakers. "Tonight," she said, "we are mourning the daughter we lost." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others looked between me and Daniel, unsure whether this was some strange joke. But Madison stepped forward immediately, holding a single sheet of paper. Her timing was perfect. She walked toward me with a sympathetic expression that might have convinced anyone who didn't know her well. When she reached the front table, she laid the paper down carefully beside my champagne glass and slid a pen toward me. It's simple, she said quietly, though the microphone still carried her voice across the room. Just confirm that the money you spent on the house was a gift to Mom and Dad. That's all. I didn't move. My mother raised the microphone again. Our daughter has allowed herself to be influenced, she said, her tone trembling with theatrical disappointment. She's letting outside voices convince her that family generosity was some kind of business transaction. Murmurs spread through the room. I could feel dozens of eyes on me. Madison nudged the paper slightly closer. The heading was exactly what I expected. Gift confirmation. $92. Ling ling ling. My name was already printed neatly above the signature line. Claire, Madison whispered, her smile thin but firm. There's no reason to make a scene. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. That was the entire plan. Put me in front of a crowd. Apply pressure. Rely on my instinct to keep peace rather than create conflict. They knew exactly who I had always been. The dependable one. The one who handled things quietly. My fingers moved toward the pen. That was when Daniel leaned slightly closer to me. His voice was so calm that only I could hear it. Truth works best in good lighting. The sentence hit me like a switch, flipping somewhere deep inside my chest. I slowly set the pen down. Then I stood up. Without saying anything, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the small USB drive Daniel had prepared. A large projector screen hung behind the band's equipment, still connected to the system the venue used earlier for photos. A few guests shifted in their seats as I walked toward it. Madison frowned. Claire, what are you? The projector flickered to life. The first image appeared on the screen above the dance floor. A bank transfer confirmation showing $92,000, moving from my account to the construction company managing the renovation. A murmur spread through the crowd. The next slide appeared. Contractor invoices. Plumbing reconstruction. Roofing replacement. Structural reinforcement. Each one clearly listed the same client name, Claire Whitmore. Another slide. Before and after photos of the house leaking roof. Cracked foundation. Broken pipes followed by images taken after the repairs were completed. Then the next slide appeared. A screenshot of text messages. Madison's name sat clearly at the top of the conversation. Once she signs the gift paper at the wedding, it's done. Then we list the house. Market's hot. Could get around $470K. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Madison's face drained of color. My mother stepped backward, lowering the microphone slowly as the reality of what everyone was seeing sank in. I turned back toward the crowd. For the first time that night, the room was completely silent. I don't want the house, I said. My voice didn't shake. I never did. I looked directly at my parents. I want the $92,000 I invested in it returned. No one moved. For a few long seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the projector. Then Madison grabbed my mother's arm and pulled her toward the exit. Her composure completely gone. My father followed a moment later, without saying a word. One by one, they walked out of the reception hall, under the same stunned silence they had tried to use against me. Daniel stepped beside me again and gently took my hand. And for the first time that entire night, I felt something settle quietly inside me. Not anger, not revenge, just the calm certainty that the story they tried to rewrite had finally been told in the right light. The legal part began quietly about 2 weeks after the wedding. Once the shock of that night had settled into something more practical, Jonathan Reed drafted a formal demand letter outlining the full timeline of the renovation payments, the documentation supporting them, and the legal argument that my parents had been unjustly enriched by the investment I made into their property. The letter was direct, professional, and impossible to misunderstand. If they refused to resolve it privately, the case would move to court. They responded faster than I expected. Within a month, the agreement was signed. My parents would repay the $92,000 in scheduled installments over 36 months, and a lien would be placed on the house to guarantee the payments. It meant that if the house was ever sold, the remaining balance would come to me first. I didn't want ownership of the property. I never had. What I wanted was acknowledgement that what I gave had value. The consequences around town unfolded in ways I never asked for but couldn't avoid hearing about. Madison's career as a real estate agent didn't survive long after the story spread through Cedar Ridge. Clients who had once trusted her began quietly choosing other agents. Within a few months, she lost her position at the brokerage entirely. My mother stepped down from several volunteer roles at church after people started whispering about what had happened at the wedding reception. Even my father, who had stayed mostly silent through everything, began calling me occasionally, usually short conversations, awkward but sincere, as if he were trying to rebuild something he didn't know how to fix. I didn't go back to the house. Instead, Daniel and I focused on building something that actually belonged to us. A year after the wedding, we bought a small place on the edge of town with a wide backyard and a kitchen that needed more repairs than either of us expected. But this time the work felt different. We chose the projects together. We painted the walls ourselves, planted a small garden behind the fence, and slowly turned the house into something warm and ours. Over time, the story of what happened began traveling further than I ever intended. Friends shared it with friends, and occasionally someone would reach out quietly to tell me they had recognized pieces of their own family in what I described. I never tried to turn it into advice, but I always told them the same thing my grandfather once told me in his quiet way. Being useful is not the same as being valued. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. And once you learn that difference, it becomes much easier to build a life where respect and love are finally the same thing. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Many people discover, sometimes painfully, that love and trust aren't always the same thing, and that healthy boundaries can change everything. If you've ever faced a similar situation with family, I'd really like to hear about it. Tell me where you're listening from and share your experience in the comments. And if stories like this interest you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one.